I'm going to get us started. Hi, I am Jennifer Phillips. I'm the program lead for network collaboration here at the Digital Benefits Network at Georgetown's Beck Center for Social Impact plus Innovation. And we are thrilled to welcome you to the second in our Summer of CX webinar series today. So the series includes 3 webinars. The first one was on July 15th, and hopefully some of you were attending that. And that was our Principles to Improve CX. And we're putting the link to that video and summary and the slides in the chat. And today's webinar is CX metrics for decision making. And hopefully you'll join us next week for our last webinar in the Summer of CX series, which is improving CX for benefits access. And that is on Wednesday, August 14th. And if you haven't registered for that last webinar, we're going to put that information in the chat now. Slides forward. So we developed this series thinking all about the state, territorial, tribal, and local leaders who are currently working to center customer experience in their agency's work to improve digital access to public benefits. And while there's excellent information that's coming from federal agencies, nonprofits, private vendors, we found that when talking to the states that there was just not as much information available about how non-federal agencies might get started in centering customer experience in their public benefits delivery work. So the second series, as I mentioned, is going to be focused on CX metrics for decision making. I'm going to do a quick overview of CX, and then our 2 speakers are going to share what we mean when we talk about CX metrics, how to think about and collect CX data, and how this data can be instrumental when making agency-level decisions about process or technology improvements. And we are so fortunate to welcome Mo Early and Sylvie Williams here with us today. Mo leads the work to support a portfolio of over 40 agencies that are working on the High Impact Service Providers, or HISP, working to prioritize customer experience, collect customer feedback, and build organizational capacity to improve service delivery in federal government. Before joining OMB, Mo served as a policy advisor in the U.S. Department of Treasury, working on the American Rescue Plan implementation and advising Centers for Disease Control on vaccine equity strategies, and supported federal agencies to use and build evidence, working with the General Service Administration's Office of Evaluation Sciences. Mo holds an MPA. I'm just enabling captions real quick. Mo holds an MBA from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government and an MBA from the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth and a BA in sociology from Wake Forest University. And Sylvie Williams is currently the program lead for customer experience at the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Unemployment Insurance Modernization, or OUIM. In that role, she is charged with assisting state workforce agencies in improving the experience of citizens interacting with unemployment insurance programs. With almost 2 decades of UX and CX experience, and a master's in human-computer interaction, Sylvie believes that better CX leads to improved public benefits access and reduced administrative burden. Those are both win-win options for both citizens and benefits administrators, so everybody should be investing in CX principles such as plain language, mobile friendliness, accessibility, and effective navigation, just to name a few. And while I am currently managing the DBN's efforts to document and align the field of practitioners and organizations working to improve digital service delivery for public benefits programs, but previously, prior to January of this year, I worked for the Illinois Department of Employment Security, leading its unemployment insurance modernization initiatives and working to improve equitable access to services, implementing human-centered design approaches, and working to enhance user experience and updating benefit system technology. Before we get started, we'd just like to cover a few of our webinar community norms and logistics. Please note this meeting will be recorded, and we also have our live captions going. The transcription, slides, and the video will be available after the website. Please use the raise hand function during Q&A, and please stay on mute unless you are asking a question. Please be kind in the chat and respectful in your communication overall. And if you are not a subscriber, we encourage you to sign up for our monthly communications, the Digital Benefits Digest and Digital Benefits in the News, and we'll put that information in the chat just now. To give everyone a sense of who's on the webinar before we start, we'd like to launch a quick poll with a few questions. And I'm going to have Isabel start that poll right now. Hopefully you've got the poll up on your screen. We're asking people what type of organization you represent, what public benefit program or programs you work on. Do you have federal funding to work on customer experience? And are you currently using CX metrics? And it looks like people are starting to answer those poll questions. Give it another minute. It looks like most people who are going to do the poll have, oh, got a little bump there. Isabel, why don't we display the responses? I'm hoping, Isabel, can people see that?
Jen, can you see
I
the
am
sharing
not.
responses?
I see the shared responses. I'm going to go over them because I'm not sure our audience can see them. But in terms of the organizations represented on the call today, we've got about 40% of attendees who are coming in from federal government, 36% from state government, 11% from county and local. We do not have any territorial or tribal government leaders on the call today, and about 7% from nonprofit and just one person from the private sector. In terms of benefit programs, we've got 11% of the people on the call coming in working on SNAP, 36% working on unemployment insurance, and then almost 50% working on either other programs or more than one of these type of programs. About 36% of the folks on the call today have answered yes, that they do have federal grant funding to work on customer experience. At least 64% of the attendees on the call are currently using CX metrics for process or technology decision making. So that's awesome. I'm going to stop the sharing and close that poll down and keep going here. So for those of you who are new to the Digital Benefits Network, our mission is to support government in delivering public benefits and services and technology that are accessible, effective, and equitable in order to ultimately increase economic opportunity. We do this through creating peer community, offering responsible and actionable resources based in credible research and analysis, offering access to multidisciplinary experts, co-creating proofs of concept and new standards, coordinating and doing deep listening across the public benefits ecosystem. And we've been developing learning opportunities like these. And finally, most importantly, the Digital Benefits Network offers the space to imagine new futures for benefits policy and delivery. A wide range of non-federal organizations also contribute to the growing awareness and library of resources related to customer experience. These organizations include nonprofits such as the Digital Benefits Network and many others whose logos are up on the screen. These organizations and trade associations like NASWA or APHSA and public entities such as traditional public benefit vendor companies are also adding to this library. And we will, our Digital Benefits Hub is home to nearly 800 different resources, including case studies, artifacts, webinars, many with a focus on human-centered design and customer experience. And the link for the Digital Benefits Hub is going into the chat. So last month, we kicked off the Summer of CX series talking about what CX is, why we should focus on it, and how the executive branch and federal agencies are emphasizing CX, and how 2 state agencies, California and Michigan, are working on CX, what difference it's making, and what they think some of the essential ingredients for successfully getting CX-related work off the ground are. So we just wanted to do a quick recap. The link from the webinar on July 15th is going in the chat, but we focused on understanding pain points, how feedback loops for CX are created, and how to define and measure CX, and diving in a little deeper on that today. Some of those success ingredients that were covered on the first call included having a vision, having strong championship and leadership, creating internal and core teams, focusing on implementation and the commitment to implementation, having dedicated resources, working with community partners, starting small and continuing to iterate, and working on proof points to demonstrate the impact that CX can have. We also shared this slide last month, which is not an exhaustive list of CX principles, but definitely highlights some of the most important ones. CX revolves around this understanding of a wide range of customers and their experiences and how they apply, receive benefits, and interact with your agencies. Better understanding CX can improve consistency and seamlessness, and it can definitely improve and reduce administrative burden or the time tax for customers, for benefit customers. And as a former state UI administrator from Illinois, we were definitely trying our best to take all these resources in, but we didn't have dedicated staff yet. And one of the biggest challenges state leaders do face is how to start and how to institutionalize the importance of CX within their agency. And today, we're going to focus on the critical importance of leveraging customer experience data and metrics to help guide agency-level decisions before changing processes or technology. Mo and Sylvie will share examples of federal guidance and how to effectively gather and analyze customer feedback, identify key performance indicators, and how to apply these insights to optimize products and services. And then I will share some examples from Illinois of how we were capturing CX data and using them to make data-driven decisions that enhance customer experience and improve overall benefit access, system integrity, and overall system performance. Okay, and I'm going to turn the slideshow over to Mo.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Jennifer. So I'm very excited to be here to talk to you about CX metrics from the federal perspective. I know that not all of it will translate directly because federal guidance and state and local guidance are all very different pieces and kind of frameworks, but I'm hopeful that some of these ideas resonate and that we can talk about how they apply within your current context. So if we go to the next slide, any of you that have heard really me or anyone from my team talk about the work that we do at the federal level for CX, you've probably seen this quote. Hopefully you've heard this quote, but this is something that President Biden said back in 2021. Which talks about we have to prove that democracy still works and that our government can work and deliver for our people. I use this quote in almost every conversation I have, but I really love using it in conversations about metrics because we can talk a lot about making sure that government still works, but metrics is the exact conversation we like to have of defining what does it actually mean to work and how can you tell that it is working, and everything's going to be a little bit different no matter what service you're working on, but there are some common themes, and I'm very excited to talk about how we think about that. So if we go to the next slide, I know in your earlier conversation, you poked around a little bit in the larger federal CX framework. We have a couple of big pieces of guidance and policy that have helped shape the work that we do. We have the most government sounding thing on the planet, the OMB Circular A11 Section 280. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that today as we go through, but also want to mention the CX Executive Order, the President's Management Agenda, and the 21st Century Idea Act, which is also now referred to as M2322, that really talks about digital experience guidance. So you'll see pieces of these all come into the world of doing CX at the federal level. I only mention them now as that in any context, there are going to be larger policy pieces and frameworks that you can pull on and align yourself to reinforce the work that you're doing for mission delivery and the ways in which it can all be aligned to improve the way that you serve the people that you serve. So if you go to the next slide, again, I'm going to focus on some of the core pieces of A11280, which is really just meant to be the way in which we provide guidance, we being OMB, to agencies, all agencies, on the way that they run the budget process, but specifically how they implement customer experience work and kind of what are the annual requirements and best practices that we are hoping and require them to go through that demonstrate good CX work. Go to the next slide. So again, I'm not going to go too much into this document because I know that this is a federal level document, but hopefully you can see some trends and some pieces from it that help shape and provide a scaffolding to organize the way that you're thinking about CX and CX metrics. And pulling out a quick quote from the top, it's this idea that measures of experience are of co-equal importance as traditional measures of financial and operational performance. And this document really tries to outline an accountability framework to deliver on all of these components at once. So the big thing to call out here that I like to mention is that part of the customer experience work is taking all of the incredible data that you're already gathering from an administrative, from a financial and operational performance pieces. We know that you're already tracking the ways that things work, whether that's the turnaround time or time to apply or the number of applications that you push through on a regular basis or the number of people you serve. What does it look like to complement those measures and track them alongside of the voices of the customers that you're serving? So we'll talk a little bit about bringing all of those different pieces together. And particularly, what does it mean to kind of build a cohesive theory of measures and metrics using all of the available pieces? Maybe sometimes that means building out additional things as well. And then how do you incorporate customer voices to then take that information, bring it up to leadership, bringing it to the public so you can be transparent, because it all kind of flows into this larger piece of tracking, setting goals, and measuring success. So if we go to the next slide, a lot of text here. I won't go into too much depth because it fits into a larger framework, but there are kind of 4 big pieces that we call it here from that guidance from the 11-280. One is thinking about measures and metrics to analyze your services. We talk a lot about digital services because a big push in the larger effort of the administration in the past couple of years have been thinking about bringing things onto digital channels. So you have things like the digital analytics program. In government, that is something that GSA runs called DAP. There's also Google Analytics or their website analytics that are already being gathered and you can look at. Maybe you've got contractors that manage systems for you. There's a lot of ways to think about leveraging those digital infrastructures to give you information that can be helpful about how things are delivered. And that can come down even to just your website. Are you collecting click data and thinking about who's visiting and what does that all look like? And how are people engaging with you in ways that you're already collecting? And then in some instances, it's going to look like, are there other ways that you can collect that basic data to see how things are performing? In the top right, can you go back 2 slides? Sorry about that. In the top right, we talk about measuring customer experience, as I mentioned, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a couple of slides, but the piece that is often missing, of course, when people manage services and delivering benefits, you're already working on all of these administrative and financial and operational pieces, but the biggest piece that is missing from the cohesive theory of managing these services is often the customer input. So when you're thinking about asking for customer input, you also need to think about kind of where are you curious to learn things? Do they link up with different operational measures? I know you talk about the entire service journey and the customer experience journey itself, but where do you want to get that different input? Like, where do you want to measure customer experience and how do you think about telling that larger story? How do you not just ask them how they feel about things one time, but how do you actually build in those feedback loops like Jennifer mentioned from the first session of thinking about what does it mean to kind of bring this all together from the customer experience perspective? The bottom 2 really talk about just how do you know that it's working? And this is a combination of customer feedback, research data, actually capturing all of these pieces in once and then comparing it to the goals that you've set. So if you are saying that people generally feel positively about a service at a certain moment, how are you benchmarking that against the broader goals that you've set for your organization? So this is a lot of text and a lot of things, and it probably makes more sense if we had a lot of time to talk through it, which is why I have a silly but hopefully functional example that we'll talk through. So if you go to the next slide, somehow we end up talking about plumbing a lot in this customer experience world, so stick with me. So breaking it down into 4 pieces. So first off, you've got to have the pipes in place if you want to see what the data and how things are moving throughout the system. So in some cases, you might already have that built. In other cases, you might need to build new pipes. Maybe the digital channels have lots of data that you don't know that you can take advantage of. So what does it mean to actually build the systems and the organizational infrastructure to be able to monitor the things that you care about? The second piece is you've got to be able to have the organizational control to turn those faucets on and off. Like, can you tell the difference in how things are being used? Can you track the way that data or water is flowing through the systems that you've built? Can you actually see how things are interacting? The third piece, and this is the customer feedback piece, is the water too hot? Is it too cold? Is it the right water pressure? What are the people that you were working with saying? This could include employees and customers, but you've got to find a way to make sure that the service that you are providing is actually being perceived in the way and received in the way that you need it to be to continually serve that population. And then last but not least, checking the water bill. Are you paying way more than you thought you were going to? That's not actually a financial measure, but comparing it, like, are you seeing things perform in the way that you expect them to perform, and building in regular checkpoints to actually, from a governance perspective, from a repetition perspective, are you checking to see if the things that you are doing are still driving the outcomes that you're really pushing towards? So if you go to the next slide, again, silly little graphics. Hopefully this helps make sense. And again, we know that this is going to look different in every context, but trying to build a cohesive theory of how all of this data, all the governance structures, all the leadership decision-making, and the public metrics against the goals that you're setting, all this comes into kind of one coherent theory of change related to CX. If we go to the next slide, as I sort of mentioned, the one piece that is most often missing entirely from programs traditionally before the CX movement took off is this idea of collecting customer feedback. There are a lot of reasons in the federal government why that has been hard in the past. We've really strived to make it easier, make it consistent, and try to minimize the burden on the individuals that are providing their input. I think we can all say that sometimes if a private company asks us a survey that is too long, you often abandon in the middle. You're like, I don't want to tell you all of these answers. So we really have tried to put forward easy ways to gather input about the performance of services. Right now, we just asked 3 quick questions. Did this interaction increase your trust with this agency? Either way, tell us a little bit more about why you felt that way. Did you have a really helpful employee? Was it actually difficult to find the information that you needed? That can help link these customer feedback measures with direct operational items that can help drive improvements as you go. And then we also make sure that people give a chance to accept open-ended feedback that provides more context, that can't really take the place of larger research efforts, but helps kind of send some signals on the things you want to look into. So if you go to the next slide, a really cool thing that we just launched a couple of months ago in relation to these surveys is a public trust dashboard for all of the services that we work with. You can go onto performance.gov/cx/data and play around with this. It's a dynamic dashboard, but essentially it helps us to tell a cohesive theory and story of trust in government services across all of the agencies that we work with. Partially, this is just to live out the value of transparency, and it builds into that larger feedback loop that is mentioned of, if you are going to ask someone for their feedback, you want to be able to demonstrate that you listen to them and that you use that information in an actionable way. This fits into that larger feedback circle and loop of how are we doing? And we care a lot about sharing with you how you say we are doing, and then we're going to track performance and improvement over time. But this is a cool thing to kind of play around with that helps see that even though services are very different, that we're trying to measure, at least in some way, in an apples to apples way to tell a cohesive story. If you pop to the next slide, I only share this here as maybe a way to spur conversations in the Q&A, or kind of bring this into the reality of the way that we work with agencies. Obviously, that is, you might be wondering or asking yourself, like, how do I implement that in my context? That is, it really is flexible to think about these core ingredients, these core pieces, and all the different things that we do. I share this here to say that these are the agencies that we currently work with on their service delivery, and you see a really wide range of services and activities, from booking a campsite on recreation.gov to applying for disability benefits at SSA, to starting a small business, to completing the census survey. There's a lot of different ways that people interact with government, and we work with folks to take those core principles and integrate them into whatever the context is that they're working on to help drive improvement. So it really is intended to be a methodology that can be embedded in whatever service context that you're working in. And we know that some of these ingredients will resonate hopefully directly in the worlds that you are working in as well. So to kind of close us out, we really use the A11280 as a container for best practices for using metrics. How do you think about operational and administrative data? How do you make sure you're actually asking your customers for feedback about those services and then trying to link that to the operational and administrative data? And how do you make sure that when you're collecting all this incredible data that you're actually looking at it on a regular basis with decision makers and with the general public to show this is a feedback loop that we are really trying to invest in. We are looking to see the way that data changes over time as we make different changes to our services, and how do we show that we are making progress. So very much looking forward to hand it off to Sylvie, who's going to walk us through some tactical examples of doing this in real life.
Thanks, Mo.
Hey, Jennifer, do I just take it over?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good midday. Thanks, Mo, for setting the bar high for the conversation today and starting at that high level view. I'm going to bring it down, like you said, to the operational level. And I love the example that you used of the plumbing. You have this data, you've collected some metrics. What do you do with that? And as I was thinking about where to take the conversation today, oh, can we stay on that first one? Thanks. This slide doesn't say a lot, but I'm going to talk a lot on this slide because I wanted to talk about bridging that gap between you have this data and you want to make improvements to your application, to your system. How do you bridge that gap? You might have data that already exists within your systems. You might have data from Google Analytics. You might have data that your customers are giving you in your surveys, on your calls. Do you listen to the words that they're throwing at you and just tear down the systems that you have and build according to what they're saying? So Jennifer mentioned that I got my master's at University of Michigan, and we heard this over and over again that Ford once said, if we listened to the people, we'd have faster horses. Now, it's never been proven that he actually said that. But the point of that quotation is that if we just listen to feedback, we would just solve a symptom. We would never look at what the original problem is. And as I was listening to Mo's example, I was thinking, well, yeah, if we just get really hot water, we'd add ice to it. If we got really cold water and we wanted hot water, sure, I'd put it on my stove. And we'd never look at where the problem exists. Why are we constantly getting hot water? Why is the faucet not giving me the water that I want? And for decades, if we look at how government has been solving problems, we have been reactionary. And what we really need to do is look at what that data is saying and then start delving into what pain points is that actually pointing to, and not just look at what those words are saying. And that's the basic point of customer experience. And we don't just want to react to what people are saying, because for us in government, customer experience isn't about just making our customers happy, because we don't see our citizens as net promoters as Amazon and Walmart does. And we can go on to slide 2, please. Customer experience for us is much more than having happier claimants. It's about having more well-informed claimants. It's about receiving a higher number of complete and accurate filings. And that in turn results in an increased claimant trust in this says UI programs because that's my program right now, but an increased citizen trust in government services. And all of that in turn results in a reduced administrative burden for states, for any level of government, for our federal employees, for state employees, for local employees. Because in the end, I don't need our Maryland UI claimants to say, hey, Maryland UI is a lot more sexier than UI in the state of Genosha, which isn't a real state or a country. But we're not getting them to compare let's say the flare jeans from Old Navy to Kohl's. So we're not asking them to go to their family and say, hey, go apply for this in another state. What we really need them to say is, I trust that my government, that my state, that my local field office is doing the best they can do when they walk away from us. So what I wanted to share with you today is the work that was done in the last year or so at the Department of Labor in conjunction with NAVA Public Benefit Corporation, and to provide some reference materials that will be shared with you that could be useful for your work at whichever level you're working at. And when you look at unemployment insurance, and for that matter, any federal, state, or local benefits, we don't look at the metrics and user data the same way that the private industry does. So if we go to the next. So the project that spanned a few months in the collaboration that I mentioned between US Department of Labor and NAVA, the purpose was to collect some recommendations that could be shared across all state workforce agencies to improve their UI forms, their websites, their applications, instructions, in order to reduce those errors that I mentioned, the time it takes for someone to read through those instructions, to apply for the benefits, to do their weekly recertifications after they've received the benefits, and in the end, to reduce any interventions that might be needed by agency employees. Let me take a step back and talk about this slide that's in front of us. So this heading that says, these resources that you'll see at the end are suggestions and not prescriptions. And that's because all of the states are at different points in their journeys, and not just their journeys. We started with the deep understanding that no two unemployment insurance programs are the same. So in no way, shape, or form were we trying to dictate any changes to applications, policy, any specific instructions. We were not creating a model application. You will not see an end-to-end journey map in any of our reference materials. You will not see any specific business process changes, and you'll not see any specific state mentioned in any of those reference materials. So then, how did we do anything useful? Next slide. What we started with was an extensive level of research. We looked at high impact sections of the claimant experience as a whole. We looked at the initial application phase of the unemployment insurance application, where all states collect a whole lot of information from an applicant. We did research with states, with subject matter experts at the US Department of Labor's UI administration, in the Employment and Training Administration. We spoke with advocates across states because they hear directly from claimants who are having difficulty understanding the programs, difficulty understanding the requirements, etc. We reviewed as many applications and instructions on websites of various states that we could. The recommendations that we made aren't just recommendations on the website, and we have links that will be shared with you. These recommendations came with tangible examples. And what I mean by that is there are screenshots of prototypes that were tested with UI applicants, folks who had either gone through the application recently, or folks who'd gone through a UI application and had received benefits in the past and could give us their feedback on their experience with the state's UI application process, through their experience, and then look at what we were suggesting, give us their feedback, and then we could do a round of change, take back some prototypes. So our recommendations on the website come with tangible examples of what could be a section that a state could use. So initially when I said, we don't have an end-to-end example of an application, but we do have tangible examples of, let's say, a question or an interaction. So if we say, for example, an address, if somebody is trying to fill out an address, use what USPS does and start filling it in for them for potential addresses that it could be. We provide that as an example. We don't just throw words on there to say, hey, potentially do this. but we provide an example that's based on testing that we conducted. Next slide. And in those research questions that we presented to our advocates, to claimants, to the subject matter experts at the department and at state, sorry, I may have forgotten to mention that on the last slide. We also talked to folks at the state workforce agencies across different states. We talked to them and asked them, when you interact with these claimants, what common errors are you seeing them make? What do you wish they knew before they submitted an application? And once they've submitted an application, what should they know? What are the questions you're seeing them ask? And one of the things that this brings to point is an important distinction between customer experience and usability, which is when somebody's filling out an application, they may be able to fill it out and leave very satisfied because they understood the words that were in that application. They understood the questions that were asked. But once they submitted it and they left, a week later, they're sitting at home and thinking, oh, you know what? I filled out that application and it was simple and well and good. But now I don't know what happened. I don't know where that is. I haven't heard anything. And that's while that application was usable, understandable, in plain language, and that was great. They have no idea what they need to do next. They've gotten no notification. They've got no communication, and that's a breakdown of customer experience. So we asked some of those questions and included that in our suggestions. Next slide. Now, to talk about specifically the usability testing that we conducted, one of the constraints about usability testing, especially after coming out of COVID, we were constrained by where folks were. Our partners in NAVA were in California and New York. And so we were recruiting in those two states, but we were able to recruit the number of participants we wanted. We were able to conduct testing in person and via Microsoft Teams. And we got robust feedback. We were able to present them with prototypes. We tested folks who had experience applying for UI and some folks who had already gone through the process of receiving unemployment insurance and then going back into the workforce. So they'd had experience being unemployed and then going back. We asked them to do several tasks on a mobile device as well as desktop. We were able to test that. And so we put those questions in front of them, went back. We did this in 2 rounds. Sorry, let me tell you about that too. We went to California, tested with them, got their feedback, came back. One of the things we learned was, as human-centered design research experts, we went in with some hypotheses of our own, and we ended up backing up on some of those ourselves. One of those was, we said, one of the questions once somebody starts receiving unemployment insurance is they have to either once a week, weekly or bi-weekly, they have to certify that they've been looking for a job, or they have to say how much they've been earning if they have partial, and I may say things wrong because I'm not a UI expert, so don't quote me on any of this. I'm going to use just random examples. But we said, give them a calculator that does it automatically for them. And we went in and we were like, this is going to work perfectly. And some of those test participants proved us wrong. So in California, we were proved wrong, and we had to come back and redo those prototypes and go back to New York and retest that. And that's perfectly fine. But one of those things is, you go into usability testing with your hypotheses, but you have to be ready to prove yourself wrong, and then go back out with a new prototype with a new hypothesis. And we came back and we published our test results, and we have those new recommendations based on our second round of testing. And the second way of testing that we did was with Jennifer's team in Illinois. And I did want to mention that another hypothesis we had was that if we recruit using benefits.gov, which had a whole number of people that visited it every day, we would put a question up there that said, help us improve our services, government services, give us your email address. And we did get a bunch of email addresses, but once we sent them an email to recruit them and schedule testing online, we had 0 responses. And so we went back to Jennifer and we said, well, we're not getting anybody. Can we use your frontline employees? And as they're talking to folks, making appointments in office, can we ask them to just ask one question as they make the appointment? Would you mind if somebody observed you while you're doing your application in office, somebody from the Department of Labor and somebody from the Illinois office? We thought we might get 5 people, and we ended up with more than that. I won't put the number out there because this was more than a year ago and I don't remember, but we did get more than double. And we managed to do some observational research that way. So there are multiple ways of conducting testing. 13, thank you, Jennifer. It was more than double. But the first way in California and New York, we paid for their time. The ones who came into the office, we did not pay them. There are pros and cons to both. When you pay them, we had them for 2 hours. We did that using a prototype. No actual PII was used. There was nothing in the back end. It was smoke and mirrors. In the office, they used their own data. There were some data sharing agreements that have to be in place, but it's actual time because they're putting their data in, actual applications are being used. So like I said, there are some pros and cons to both approaches. Next slide. This is just, I'm not going to go through these slides or word by word. So if we can go to the next slide. These are just some of the outreach materials that NAVA created, and these were all approved by the legal team at USDOL, which also then helps our states if they want to use them. They've already been vetted by the federal legal team, so it's a little easier for our state partners to then go ahead and use them. The recruitment materials are already created. Go ahead, next slide. And this was the screening questionnaire, just helps. And I mean, anytime you put something online to recruit, you've got a screen, you get hundreds of emails, you vet it down to dozens, and then you get your 7 or 8 participants. Next screen. Incentives, once again, it is just, we use GSA guidance to get that through our legal team. However, it also seemed very, going to use, it just seemed not right to recruit for unemployment insurance and not compensate them for their time. Next slide. We had an informed consent form for the research process. As I mentioned, though, the one that we were doing, it was all smoke and mirrors. None of their PII was used. We used made up scenarios, but for the ones that we did in Illinois, they were using their own data. So we needed agreements with Illinois, and we had their informed consent form, which also stated that none of their information would be used. None of what they did would affect any of their actual benefits. Next. Those are the links to the reference materials on USDOL site. And I think this is just all of the research that was done. A lot of work has been published on the US Department of Labor site.
And Sylvie, we'll make sure all of these slides get out to all attendees so that they have.
Yeah. I was going to say, don't put all of these links in chat.
But there's, Sylvie has created a huge treasure trove and toolkit of resources and links in her slides, and we'll make sure we get those out to everybody after this webinar. So thank you. Thanks, Sylvie.
No problem. Let me just say one thing. Before I started there was a lot of work done by the customer experience team at USDOL, and a lot of work done after I got there. So yes, there is a whole lot of material there. But thank you for having me, Jennifer.
Thank you. And so I'm going to take over and talk a little bit. And Sylvie's team was 100% backing the Illinois Department of Employment Security team as we were going through this. So I'm just going to share a little bit about how user-centered data analysis was helping guide the process and technology decisions at IDES, or Illinois Department of Employment Security. I started after the pandemic and was one of the executive team members who was charged with creating the agency's UI modernization strategy and implementing our plans for how to use the ARPA grant funds. So I'm going to go forward. So Mo mentioned this early on, and so did Sylvie, but I think of customer experience data collection and analysis kind of like detective work. I immersed myself in learning about how staff and claimants were experiencing UI in Illinois. So dove into the UAT environments, tried to figure out how staff were trained and with what materials, what customer experience data we actually had that was already in existence, and then like what gaps were still remaining. And it was really in that ethos of, yes, we have lots of different data sources within the agency, but we were missing, or like we were not tapping into or optimizing the customer experience data to help us figure out like those problem solving or detective kind of work things. So I'm going to just give an overview of 5 quick examples of the type of CX analyses and data that we were looking at and how we were using them. So first off, and Sylvie just put up an example of this, like survey analysis. I think Mo referenced it as well. Thinking about places along points in time along the journey where you might want to be asking a question of your beneficiaries. So I'm going to talk about it in a second, but we had an online survey pop up that was at the end, like just before a claimant would submit the online UI application. We had over 300,000 responses since it was instituted in April 2020. And on a weekly basis, about 8% of people that were applying for UI were taking this, and it trended to the negative, which was really helpful, but it was a pretty robust response rate. The second type of analysis we were doing, and I'm going to show some examples of this, are funnel analyses. So this is where we were using the actual benefit system data to look at points in the UI application and the UI certification processes where people were abandoning or that they'd get stuck. And you could actually see that in the data. And we actually had some coaching from USDOL, and I'll talk about that in a second. The third is that also with USDOL's help, we did observational research. So we worked on an informed consent form. I'll get into this in a second, but we did watch and observe 13 people do live claim filing in person. And then the fourth is website analysis. Mo referenced this earlier too. This is found data. This is not collected data. We were sitting on a gold mine of website data and other analytic data that we could drive content changes for better navigation and language accessibility in plain language. So we had like our Adobe website analytics, but we also had our website translation analytics that we could be looking at and finding out places where people were getting stuck. And then finally, just using journey maps to identify those pain points, like along the plumbing, right? Like where in the plumbing infrastructure is there a clog? And like what's the best, like what's causing that clog? And how do you pull the clog or the tangled mess of hair apart so that the plumbing's working again. So I do want to just say that IDES did not have a CX department, and we had no organizational structure like my Doe from California EDD shared in the first webinar, right? We didn't have staff, we didn't have a governance structure. It wasn't seated in the agency organizational chart. And really, like, this was about being scrappy and then being in sleuthing mode, right? Like that detective mode, and working to convince and recruit bargaining unit staff to help along the way. And those bargaining unit staff who joined in this expressed just how like happy and appreciative they were to be asked about customer experience, and to be asked to contribute to this work, because they're the actual experts in pain identification, which is really interesting. And we had virtually no resources. We were leaning very heavily on USDOL's Office of UI Modernization CX team that Sylvie was a part of. And I'm going to say this too, that for anyone working on the state, territorial, tribal, or local levels, we were leaning on our academic friends in Illinois to help do some pro bono work and have some students work with us as well. So I think that's also an untapped resource. And I say this to say that customer experience metrics can be collected and analyzed, and you may be sitting on data that you don't even know about, or like you could tap into, even with a bare bones staff. So and what we were raising to the surface was helping answer all sorts of questions about why things weren't working at the agency as they were intended to do. So just coming back to the first one on the survey side of things, one of the biggest surprises my second month on the job was that one of the IT staff developers asked me if I knew about this pop-up survey that was coded into the online application, and I did not, and was shocked that we had such a huge data set to look at. So with USDOL's help, they actually helped not only improve the methodology of the questions, the survey questions, but they also helped us create the Python scripts to analyze all of the open response data. And then what we did was we made this into an internal process where on a weekly basis, we were getting this data. We were looking at the keyword analyses from the Python scripts, and we could communicate with other members in the field staff, in our communications and our IT, to say like, hey, there's a problem here, right? And you could anticipate the problems before you'd say have a bottleneck in a call center that you could identify through some of this survey data. And there's a link to a write-up that USDOL did on that. Again, I mentioned the fact that, you know, sometimes government leaders can lean on friends in academia, and we did that with the Harris School of Public Policy at the University of Chicago. There's MPP students. We turned the survey questions and the data over to them, and they were finding different places where we could be improving not only the survey methodology, but like how we were analyzing the data and using it as a metric to point to decisions that were being made either technologically or in a process way. Just kind of going forward on the funnel analysis side, I know this is a little messy, but I do think it's worth talking about because I think this is a source of data that sometimes is overlooked. So again, with USDOL's help, we started asking the IT benefit system people to pull out the weekly application and certification data so that we could see time, average time on sessions. You can see some of these numbers. I know they're probably not meaning that much, but you could also see abandonment rates, like where the funnel was tapering down, and like where we had certain problems that we should be taking a look at. And all of this data was in terms of decision making. Illinois is in the process of putting out an RFP to improve its online application and its online UI portal. And so all of this data was driving, all the processes to help shepherd and shape that RFP. So we were super fortunate to be assigned that customer experience staff from OUIM. It was basically almost like having another unit in our agency for close to a year, where we were meeting with them and being coached on how to elevate CX, so that you could have that data be at the forefront of problem solving and solution creation. And you could anticipate and proactively prevent bottlenecks in other places in the agency from happening. This is just another example of sort of like how a funnel analysis gets, how we were looking at that and looking at like where we were seeing attrition in certain parts of either the application or the claims process. The other dimension of CX research and analysis that we did that Sylvie mentioned earlier was that we did do live claim filing observation. Now, this is probably the most time-consuming and labor-intensive type of data collection to get a CX metric, but we did follow 13 people doing their claim filing in local offices. Again, this type of data collection went right into the agency's work on an RFP for a replacement application and an improved claimant portal. And we, unfortunately, it was a huge internal victory to have this happen, including getting the informed consent approved by legal departments in our agency and by USDOL. But we were not, unfortunately, able to pay participants for volunteering to be observed. My colleague Molly Luby from IDAS is going to be talking about this a little bit more in depth next week when we talk about CX for benefit access. But I did want to just show that one of the ways that this data was also pointed out and was easy to show to the executive team is that we had a problem with the digital front door, right? That we could see that 11 out of 13 people were having problems with the initial iLogin identity step, and then having trouble with actually registering and getting on the UI application. And then things like the employment questions, and Sylvie talked about this too, where USDOL has done a bunch of testing on like the questions in the application that actually trip people up. And all of these things get elevated to the executive level in our agency saying, okay, these are the problems. And you could validate all of these problems with call center data. Like you could map like why people were calling for password resets. People were calling because they didn't understand some of the terminology and the employment questions. And you could just shine a spotlight on where in that plumbing system, like there was a clog. The final things that I just wanted to touch on were website analysis and journey mapping. These for website analysis, in most cases, your agency probably has all this information. I think it's a question of like how you use it to look at some of the questions of ease of access and navigation, and finding some of those clogs in the plumbing. But we were using our website analytics to see like what was, what this is a kind of small thing, but like who was coming in on what type of devices, which pages were translated into which languages, and like thinking about how the navigation on our site has metrics that we could be looking at on a weekly and monthly basis. On the journey mapping side, again, I think Mo's example of the plumbing is so spot on, right? Like you map the journey and then you figure out like, okay, where are the clogs and what's causing them? One of our best examples on the customer journey mapping side was in UI, anyone who receives a UI benefit also has to pay income taxes on those benefits and gets an IRS form called a 1099, making sure we did a journey map of that process to understand whether people, how and why people were coming into local offices for that when it was available online. And we actually used that journey map and some of our CX data to help nudge and pivot the process, and had a huge success in having people switch from coming in to get a paper 1099 to being able to access it on their own in our portal and getting it online. The final slide that I just wanted to go over was that for me in my former life, we were very focused on fraud and non-fraud overpayments. And the headline was always fraud, fraud, fraud. But when you looked at the data, the yellow part of this pie chart basically shows that of the improper payments that Illinois was making in 2023, almost 60% was related to claimant error. And in many cases, this is not, claimants were not, purposefully making these mistakes, right? And this was our job to figure out how to use the customer experience data that we have and that we were trying to get to answer the questions like, why is this happening? And how can we prevent these mistakes from happening, both for the customer, for the claimant's benefit, but also for just overall agency performance. So I'm going to end there, and we're going to open it up for your questions. And while people are thinking about questions, we had a couple that we wanted to throw out to see if we can get some discussion going. So for the states who are on the call, we'd really love to hear who's already using CX metrics. We got some of that information from the poll. Would love to hear what your challenges are and what resources you need the most. So we're going to come, please feel free to come off mute or to put a question in the chat and we'll voice it over. It's a quiet group. Maybe Mo and Sylvie and I, we should get a conversation going and seeing if other people want to jump in.
That's
I
funny,
can
Jennifer.
start one. Sorry.
Yeah.
I can start one. It's probably a little on the negative side, so I'll apologize from the get-go. But I think as an agency, sometimes the leadership doesn't yet see the value in having resources that do these kinds of jobs. And so we have been able to bring in designers and writers and all of those good folks as part of the grant funding that's been extended to us. Of course, that grant funding is temporary and the need for those positions is not. And so as we push to show everyone the value of that work, how maybe some insight into what we can do to improve that with leadership.
Thanks, Heidi. And Heidi, do you want to just tell everybody where you're calling in from? I know you're calling in from where you are.
I don't know if I want to tell anybody. No. I'm with Kentucky, and we have brought in two really great writers. They're on the call, so I have to say that. No, I'm just kidding. Actually, they are fantastic. I don't know how we ever did all of these things without them. They are writers, but that is not all they do. They're amazingly organized and intelligent people. And then we brought in a couple of designers as well. And over the last year and a half, and there's so much benefit to having them, and I want to keep them forever. But I'm not sure that that upper leadership sees, but upper leadership, cabinet leadership yet sees it.
So, Heidi, I'll take a stab at this and then Mo and Sylvie jump in. This was something that we hadn't resolved. We hadn't figured out the answer to that in Illinois yet. But the more that we could tie the CX data to savings, some type of return on investment, especially related to a call center, right? Like the call center is a response to a problem, right? Like it's like the plunger, like for the clogged toilet, right? Like the toilet clogs, like you can't figure out the answer by yourself. You cannot figure it out online. And like you got to call for like the plumber or the plunger, the guy who's gonna come or the person who's gonna come and plunge. And that call center has a cost, a big one, at least for our agency, right? So we had not figured out how to perfect it, but trying to tie the CX metrics, like ease of use, like the needing needing a call center or an office response, trying to drive some of those things down in the streamlining and figuring out how to put a price on it. Mo and Sylvie, do you guys have reactions? Or if other people on the call are doing this type of work and have ideas, we'd love to hear from you.
I think that's where the time tax, the administrative burden on the state employees, right? You have to collect that data on number of calls and time spent on solving those problems or answering those calls and collecting, because even at my last agency, that was the data that we collected when we first put up the list, the very first listening post, and we started collecting the data on, well, most of our complaints are coming in for this very simple task that people can't do online. So let's solve for that. And while it's not sexy to solve for a simple problem, and it doesn't splash the big headlines online or in newspapers that, oh, they solved this small problem, but in the end, it reduces a huge amount of burden on the agency, and that burden then transfers to a cost on the calls that are coming in and the foot traffic that's coming into our field offices, which then translates to they can then focus on the larger problems and address the backlog. And the problem with that is that you have to invest in that upfront data gathering and show that that's where you are sinking money right now in answering those questions over and over again.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we just completed was with our online application, we're going through it with our phone system now too, was that plain language. And I hadn't really put the ends together on the writer's ability and the designer's ability to modify those in such a way that the process actually leads to less staff time after the fact, and how to quantify that. So I can work on that. That would be helpful for sure.
Yeah, and the only other thing, I mean, we're circling around the same truth that, like, what are the pain points of the leadership that you need to buy into this? Like, where are they feeling pressure? Where are they feeling heat? What are and you never really want to frame it as what are the headlines that they're trying to avoid? But in reality, customer experience and customer feedback ends up being an incredible way to demonstrate the highest value use of money and resources and time. So I think there's a lot of instances in the history of this work where people, leaders or others think that this is the problem. But if you look at the customer feedback data, you actually realize that it's a completely different problem. And that helps build the momentum to invest in asking the question in the first place. So you end up doing things in the right area, and you've got proof that it's real. And to Sylvie's point, you've got the baseline of it was a problem and now it's not, and we can translate that into a language and that aligns with the priorities of the folks you need to buy in. I mean, we know, especially even before you bring people in that have the skills and talents that you need, a lot of times people are just doing this on the side of their desk and like really trying to make improvements, and being able to tell that story in context and publicly can be really, really helpful in terms of what it means for, I mean, we always talk about customers, but employee burden is also huge. And it's time and backlog. And when those things get too large, the pressure gets put on the folks you're trying to align with you. So putting yourself in those shoes is super helpful.
I do like, and I'm still talking, sorry about that, but I do like the opportunity to, because we brought folks in as contractors, and I like the opportunity for them to gain insight and knowledge and experience in these forums where they can learn something that they maybe didn't know before, and being able to network. I think that's really important to keep everybody involved in those kinds of things. So we
100%.
appreciate that.
Heidi, were you on the July 15th webinar?
I was a little bit. We're juggling, right? Because Kentucky is in a modern or moving to a new system, and we kicked that off in July. And so I'm in a lot of those meetings right now. So I'm having to decide which thing I go to. So
Well, I think the
yeah.
reason I'm mentioning it is that both Mai and Brett, so California and Michigan, like one of their biggest takeaways was the need for commitment, championship, and leadership, right? Like in figuring out how to build and sustain this type of work. And then like I mentioned this earlier on, but I really focused on trying to recruit from our bargaining unit staff because, oh my gosh, they know where the problems are. 100%. And being able, like one of the things I didn't have a chance to do or left was I wanted to go and photograph the fax room because people can upload documents, but they also still use the fax machine. And just taking pictures of those rooms is, I think, a really interesting storytelling technique to share with executive leaders in the agency, saying like, look, do you understand what's going on? Like, do you see that this is still happening and that is something that could be resolved and save people, agency staff time, but also save claimants and employer time. And there was no notification. So you'd fax or you'd upload a document and we had no notification system. So people would do it like 50 times in a row. Anyway, Mo, do you want to jump in?
So the last thing that I will add, if one of the barriers is just getting this to resonate as either in the short term or the long term with the leaders that you're working with, regardless of where they sit. Something we love to advocate for is, I don't want to call it secret shopping, but we do a lot of field visits where we bring leaders out into the world so that they can see it. Have the person that you work for sit next to one of your call center folks, or go into the fax room, like Jennifer is saying, and then they go, it takes what? It takes how many clicks to get to this thing? Are you, and that human aspect and listening in on calls, if you can, of the people that are calling the call center or going into an assistance center in a field office, like that really, I mean, we talk a lot about human-centered design, but in reality, that's like really putting the humans at the center of what it can do when people just don't realize how complex and how hard some of this stuff ends up being because of the way that the systems and the documents and the FAQs are designed. Like that, let the work speak for itself. And if you can get somebody to go on a ride along with you for a day, like that's super helpful.
Thank you.
It looks like we've got Danielle with a question.
Well, I don't have a question per se, but I just wanted to just share that California has user-centered design during our statewide eligibility. We condensed from 3 eligibility systems into 1 recently, and using the user-centered design approach obviously has been valuable to enhancing customer experience, but the challenge that we have is being able to actually see raw data to give us confirmation that the implemented changes are having a positive impact on application submission and experience, while also trying to hold true to state and federal regulations. So, we obviously have a wide and diverse network of stakeholders. so having the raw data and then also being able to hear from our advocates and other leaders in the community that are actually using the application and are finding issue with certain areas. Like we have like a well-versed information and approach to trying to solve and fix the areas that need to be fixed in our application. So I think that's like a big challenge, is sort of, you know, hearing what our stakeholders are saying, and then being able to compare that with data so that we have an actual approach to changing and fixing elements of an application so that it is well-rounded for customers and their experience in using a SNAP application. Specifically, I'm speaking for CalFresh, but anyways.
So Danielle, this is Jen, and I'm hearing you, and I'm imagining like and wishing this is something that I had when I was in Illinois, and I want to ask Sylvie and Mo, are there like good templates for state, territorial, tribal, local agencies about how to like take some of that raw data and put it into a simple dashboard or a simple like a data analysis, like storytelling that you can take up to like an executive level? Are there good examples of that out there?
So, I mean, we have a mix of examples across our high impact service providers that have figured out, and one thing that one example I meant to say earlier, but I'll say now, is like, not everything needs to be the Cadillac right off the bat. Like you can do the bicycle version or the walking version. Like it can be simple. So dashboards can look like a lot of things. Like frankly, updating a whiteboard every day with the updated data in itself is a dashboard because it helps you see the relationship between these pieces. I know that if it's a whiteboard or you're manually entering data, that's a lot of staff time. So we're always trying to weigh those balances. But I think not necessarily an immediate state administered program examples, because obviously you're dealing with a lot of different layers and hurdles of accessing people directly. Sometimes partners can be really helpful with that, but obviously you can't tie it directly with some of the operational data. We've seen some really good dashboards recently coming out of the Farm Service Agency at USDA. Like they've found some really cool ways to link all these things together. We click around on the data dashboard that I shared earlier, only because when I say that, like we have the standard survey template that I talked about, that data flows directly into that Tableau dashboard. So while it's not at the state level, at least shows how those connections happen, but that starts to get into doing that with a standard way of asking questions across multiple programs or across multiple offices. It helps kind of flow into that dashboard, because otherwise there's probably some frameworks we could talk through that would be helpful to think about how do you align the moment where you're asking the survey to the larger operational data and the journey, and how do you think about all those pieces. So there's definitely some follow-on conversations that could happen to be helpful with that, but I don't know that I have an out-of-the-box template at the moment that works immediately, but maybe something with more conversation.
And Danielle, what we can do after this, like toward the end of the series, is we're going to be putting a bunch of this information up on the Digital Benefits Hub and we'll try and think about like some make the case, kind of like do some sleuthing and look for some make the case examples. Jen, Tracy?
Yeah, thank you. This is kind of related, and your comment and Danielle's comment reminded me of it, but one of the things that we see, I work with the advocacy community. I'm helping to promote this user engagement in the process, and really grateful to Danielle and her team for helping to support that as well. But what we also see is like, even when we bring forward client experiences, it kind of pushes up against like resources or other priorities with security. So like we know that like having multi-factor authentication is really important, but it's also really hard for a lot of folks to navigate that. So like we've been trying to find out how the decision makers who are directly making the decisions about what to do with our California website, like, how do they incorporate customer needs as they're making these decisions? And we haven't really gotten an answer. And I'm wondering if it's because there isn't an answer. And so I'm wondering if there's templates or recommendations or models for how do you weave in this UX to these other aspects of trying to figure out what you do with limited resources.
I'll take the first stab at that, Jen, and it's a really great question. And it's a tricky one. And I'll just speak from my own experience in Illinois. I was a member of the exec team in the UI agency in Illinois, and I would try and put this information in front of that team each chance I had, right? And I was saying earlier that this was scrappy and like we didn't have like a full team and we were MacGyvering our way through all of this. But sometimes just putting some of the data in a PowerPoint or using like a picture. And I also think having trying to figure out how to elevate the voices of staff. Those were some of the ways that I was trying to get attention, in addition to trying to, wherever possible, to show where a problem was having a boomerang effect on a different part of the system, and that there was a cost there.
That's really helpful. Thanks.
The other thing that I'll reiterate too is we see a lot that not everybody has built in direct testing into the launch of a new product or things like that. So even if, and it's never going to be perfect. We know that there's lots of tensions between the rigorous evaluation of effectiveness and initial clues at what might not be working. But it's, even if you can only get, 5 or 6 people to test a new system or to walk through a process and let you just see how it goes. And there's definitely resources around how to do that ethically and without biasing responses. That helps at least give you some data to share. Like we watched, 9 out of 10 people get caught up at this moment because we don't have enough good guidance around how to do 2-factor authentication. Like we need to add this to our process and we need to train our partners that help people go through this process. Like even that can help tweak it if you can't solve the larger technological issue. It's definitely giving as much legitimacy to the voices of this feedback as you possibly can, whether it's employees or individuals. And that of course takes extra time. But sometimes finding partners can be helpful and other things can be helpful, and always happy to brainstorm those options too.
Any other questions out there before we wrap up? Well, I'm gonna do a terrible job on pronouncing your name. Is it Biba?
My name is Habiba.
Biba. Pardon me.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I don't work in the public sector, but I'm a UX UI designer and currently dealing with unemployment. So that's the reason why I decided to join these conversations and understand, as someone that is dealing with these interfaces and realizing like something's not right sometimes when it comes to like the heuristics and the buttons, trying to navigate the buttons, the frustration. Sometimes you're just like, I have to call because I cannot understand. It's not robust. It's not like, modern day what we're interacting with every day. But sometimes you have no choice, especially when you're unemployed, to daily interact with this interface that you're dealing with. I'm from New York, and I usually interact with the New York unemployment website. And at times I just end up calling because I'm just like,
Yep.
I don't know what I'm looking at. That's my first initial thing that I did, was call, because the interface was just hard to navigate. And then it's just like, I don't know, sometimes it just gives you that feeling that they're not catering to the people. It's like, okay, people need us, so this is why we just make these websites. So my question is that I heard some people talk about contract, and I feel like it's just unfair that, they're hiring contractors when, I feel like as, the internets are and like the websites are evolving. I feel like, people should be there long term while it evolves because, every day iterations happens. I just have a question to like higher up, how are these changes and what frustrations are you guys are dealing with?
Well, I think we've shared a bunch of them from two different federal perspectives and then a state perspective, and folks like Heidi and Danielle there are lots of really good people working in these agencies trying to say that are raising the flag to say like, hey, this is not working as intended. I think Mo actually had a great quote in the beginning about that. We started the last webinar talking about some of the research that just shows like a positive experience with government really can boost that trust in government. It can help improve the morale for people using the system and for the people that are behind the scenes running these systems. So I think there's a lot that's being done. And on the contracting side, some of these big contracts are for the benefit systems themselves. I think that's what Heidi was alluding to in Kentucky, where the actual technology that runs the benefit system is generally contracted out or can be contracted out by different states. Mo or Sylvie, I'm going to move us into wrapping up in a second, but do you have anything else that you want to say before I move us forward? All right, I'm just a huge thank you, Mo and Sylvie. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was such a great and exciting call. And for anyone who is interested, Jen, you raised multi-factor authentication. For anyone who is interested in how to improve customer experience for benefit access, and what we mean by that is like, what are the front door, the digital front door challenges that people are having, like multi-factor, and how can we use the principles and the metrics to improve that benefit access for people. And so that's next Wednesday, August 14th, and we're going to put the link for that registration in the chat right now. We've got, and I should mention that we've got leaders from NIST, New Jersey, and Illinois who are going to be talking on that webinar. I just want to thank everybody for spending time today. Sorry about the glitches on Zoom earlier, and we really hope that you'll stay connected with us on social media and subscribe to our monthly digital digest and news. And with that, I'm going to close the webinar and say thanks to everybody for participating.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.